I'm really happy to have this opportunity to introduce you to Carla Patullo. She is a Grammy winner for 2024 Best New Age Ambient or Chant Album. For the name of the album is called So She Howls, which is featuring Tonality and the Scorchio Quartet. Carla, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling great. Thank you. And
Yay.
thanks. Happy to be here. And yeah.
Well, how cool. A Grammy Award, that's one of the biggest awards we can achieve in the music industry. Can you tell me when you were recording this album, did you have any hopes that this would happen, or did this just
Yeah.
miraculously occur? How can you give me a little bit of insight? And I have a lot of personal questions I want to ask you too, but I want to
Yeah.
jump in on can you believe it?
Yeah. I mean, well, first, I can't believe it still. It's, even a few months after, but, I definitely, when I started this album, it was coming out of a very tough place personally. And it was just really a diary for me. And in fact, I thought it was going to just be my last album. So it was just this like, you know, fundamental need to have music in my life and to help me, conquer my day basically and get through it. And so the Grammys were like, that was like the last thing, being a musician, I've always, dreamed of, yeah, someday I'll have a Grammy, maybe, I don't know. It's one of those things that seems so far away, and
Yeah.
hard to attain.
Yes,
Yeah.
I hear you. Can you speak a little bit about when you said you were going through a challenging time? What was the challenge that you were going through that creating music helped you to work through?
Yeah, so this was just right before the pandemic hit, but I got a diagnosis of breast cancer.
Mm.
Totally, shocked about that too, because it wasn't something that I had, my family, anyone in my family had experienced. So it was really just shocking um, and, um, and it was a really like difficult thing because when there's so many unknowns with cancer, especially in the beginning as you're going through a diagnosis. And um, so there was like a good like month or two where I was just kind of like, what's going on? How much cancer do I have? Like you
Yes.
know, and those were the real hard months of just being utterly like can't think of anything else. Can't, music, my career, everything, like there's a big halt in my life, and then the pandemic kind of was there. Everyone kind of was there with me soon after, unfortunately.
Mm,
But that's, kind of where it started, and it was just a really hard journey through it.
I bet.
Um, yeah.
I can't imagine. I always wonder how would I or will I react if I receive that type of information? What type of treatment did you choose to undergo?
Well, for the type I had, it was pretty like it has evolved to a pretty standard treatment. I was something called triple positive, which was hormone positive and also HER2 positive. And HER2 positive, within the last 30 years, I believe it was in the 90s, there were these courageous women who took this trial and actually here in Santa Monica, they created a new drug called Herceptin, which is the drug that saved my life and made that cancer ground, change now to a really good, well, a very treatable kind of cancer.
Got it. Got it. How
Yeah.
how long of a journey was that till from the time of diagnosis to the time where I'm guessing you're
Yeah.
saying that you're in the free and clear? Is that true?
Well, yes, I'm in the free and clear. It's, you do like the drug chemo and the Herceptin part and the surgery and then radiation. So you really do everything with this type of cancer. That's the downer.
Yeah.
But the results are so good. And, I was one of the lucky ones that it really worked well for. So it was just a physical um, just hard physically, to get through it, but I would say even harder mentally, just to process everything because it's happening so fast. It's like, "Ooh, we don't know what's going on. Now we know you're getting better," and it's just moving fast, and I've been, so the treatment's long and you do take preventative medicine down the road, so it was a few years there, and of course, like, I still take hormone therapy now,
Mm,
so,
understood.
but the irony is I feel, coming to this, like, really tough illness, I'm, like, healthier now than I've ever been. Like, I got myself together and I go hiking, I go to the gym, I'm,
Yeah,
exploring new activities and, keeping myself fit, eating well, you know.
nice. All those
Yeah.
things you weren't thinking about before, I'm guessing.
No,
Just took for
no,
granted or just figured I could do this forever, nothing's gonna hurt me, that type of thing,
Y
or
yeah, and, be it exactly, like, something with that mindset when you're in your 30s, you're still like, "Oh, whatever," but it did it was a real growing point. I really grew, like, thinking about my health, and, I feel like I write better music now even because, I used to be in my studio, sometimes meeting film scoring deadlines, and I would just sit in a chair for 14 hours and, like, really not think about it, and just,
yeah,
be like, "Oh, I'm a hard worker." And
yeah,
I'd get really burnt out and, so allowing myself to say, "No, my body is number 1," it's like everything follows, it's like this momentum
yeah,
that gives me more creativity, more, you know, just I'm more creative, I think, because of it.
and that's amazing to hear, and I'm so congratulations, that's
Yeah.
an
Oh,
incredible
thank you.
journey.
Thank you.
It's inspirational too, I'm sure there's lots of I don't know what the stats are. What are the stats these
Yeah.
days for the amount of people, not just cancer, but maybe even more specifically breast cancer?
I mean, I think with breast cancer, they say it's like 1 out of every 4 women,
Wow,
something crazy like that, and with the type I had, it's like 20% of that, so it's I think there's been so many great strides with breast cancer. When I first got diagnosed, I learned quickly how many types of breast cancer there are. I mean, there's really a lot of different kinds of breast cancer alone. Um,
yes.
yeah, so it's just, I think there's always room for improvement. I think, with the type I had, I was very, very lucky. I have a very small chance of it coming back. I mean, it's not 0, but, I'm deciding to live with the high percent in my mind, that I'm okay and just doing
Yeah.
everything I can to lower that, you know?
Do you feel like there's in the back of your mind, there is that worry and or concern of like, well, how what could this happen again and that type of thing? Is that
Yeah,
maybe
it's gotten better. Like the first year or 2, I was, anytime I felt something or, I was really a little bit more panicked, even going to any doctor, going to the dentist, like I
yeah,
had that like PTSD of like, what's gonna happen, so it took a while. I think like giving myself and my body like the time for me to like recognize and take the time in my body to see how I'm feeling myself, I think that's key. Cause like, there's this whole, like, broken trust thing that happens, like, like, it was so
yeah,
weird, I could detach myself from my body and be like, "What's wrong with you? How did you get cancer?" You know?
yeah, good
But then
point.
but now yeah, but now, like, it's like I'm trusting my body again, and I'm also very aware of what I'm, doing to my body. Like, I've made the choices to cut alcohol, to do different things, to, anything that I can do to prevent it. And that gives you power, I think.
Yeah. It sounds like you have a
Mm,
greater, almost, an enhanced, appreciation for life. I hear that from folks
yeah.
that make it through battling cancer.
Yeah.
You just come out a different person.
Yeah. I mean, well, there's just so much gratitude every day, like we know what it's like to wake up and, not feel great or to wake up and, and just, not this unknown, let the fear swallow you, And I think, like, when you can wake up and just have a moment to appreciate just what's around you in that moment. That's amazing.
Oh man.
Um,
Well, what type
but
of how did music interact with, or how did you interact with music
yeah.
through this whole process in relation to creating this album?
Well, there's a point when you're going through stuff where you wanna, like, keep yourself busy, but also, like, I was just really, like, unmotivated when I was going through it, and so I just, like, little by little, I started singing, really howling, and that's where the name "So She Howls" comes from,
Mhm.
um, into my phone. I would just record little things, and then, as it was, like, in motion with what I was going through, with the news I was getting from my doctors, there was optimism there. And so, okay, maybe I'll set up a microphone. And I just would sing, it was a different way of composing because nothing was pre planned. There was no like, I'm going to write an album about this and that. Because first it was like, I'm going to write a song or like, I'm just going to sing this into the microphone and see what happens.
Wow.
And that was very much the album, and, and I kept all those vocal tracks, I kept all the rawness because I felt like I was recording a time and place, and I wanted to preserve that. I don't think I could recreate those emotions, and why would I, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Very
so,
cool.
yeah.
Well, what was your what is, can you give me a little bit of a understanding of your background with music, and when did you first fall in love or come in contact with playing or performing music? Were you young, or is this something?
Yeah.
Mm.
I grew up, my parents and my grandparents were from Italy, and we all we all lived in this house, and they would always sing. They were from a small farm town, and my grandmother would always be like, let's go and, sit down, press this tape recorder and record me because I want you to have these like tapes of me when you grow up. And I kind of, fell in love with music, um, like, soon after, I started playing with, like, a toy piano, and, I always remember, though, wanting to create something new and not necessarily play, like, Mary Had a Little Lamb or whatever, and so I really think of
Even very early on when you were learning those classic gangster
yeah.
rhymes, and you right away felt like, I want to make my own song.
Yeah, it was, I don't know, I just would just think about, I just remember thinking like, "Oh, I just wanna go off and play something that sounds great." And, um, and it was interesting to see, like, my grandparents too, like, because they didn't have that music education. They grew up in this small town, uh, and just to see, like, their talent, like, even though they just were like, "We're storytellers, we're just passing on these folk songs," or it just inspired me.
That's so
And,
cool.
yeah, and, like, and then I started to not go to school and play in the band and do all that and learn instruments, but then, I just got it started writing. Yeah,
Cool. Well,
yeah.
when did you write your first song? How old were you?
I think I was, like, 11, and it was a song I remember, and it was called "Lies, Lies, Lies." I don't know who I wrote that
Was it because like
about.
you
My first
figured
crush,
out
maybe, I don't know.
Santa Claus wasn't real? I mean, that's a classic.
Probably, yeah.
I have an 11-year-old daughter, so I'm trying to imagine that what would her first song be like? If she came up with "Lies, Lies, Lies," I'd be like, "Wow, she's deep. She's gonna take this far." That's amazing. What instrument
Yeah.
were you composing with? What was your first
Um,
love in relation to instrumentation?
well, I had been using the saxophone, doing that in band. That was my introduction, but really the piano was my first instrument, and I just began writing and singing. But when, I decided to learn how to sing and play the piano really so I could accompany myself and write songs, and get the knowledge to like
Yeah.
to do that. And so that's kind of how that grew, yeah. And, you know,
Amazing. I see. I mean, for those of you that are listening, you can also check us out on the YouTube video and your background. I see lots of instruments. I see piano,
yeah.
guitars.
Yeah.
How many
Yeah.
instruments do you play proficiently?
Well, Yeah, well, okay, so as a composer, like, there's a joke that we really don't play all these instruments great. We know how to, like, dabble in all of them so we can create something, and then, a lot of times when we have the sessions, we'll call over, a
Mm,
really great guitarist who'll, like, knock it out in a minute,
got it.
But I try to pick up a lot of different instruments. I love actually learning a new instrument. So I don't know if you see, I might be blocking the cello. Yeah.
Nice.
The cello is something I picked up actually during the pandemic and during my cancer journey. And I was able to use that on the album a little bit. But of course, I brought in the Scorchio Quartet because they're phenomenal. But in a very fundamental way, I just would play like certain notes. Um, and I was kind of exploring binaural beats. So I was trying to just get into frequency ranges that could put your mind in a really um, good state of mind, of relaxation.
Very cool. I know
Yeah.
the description from the award or the category that your album is in says new age ambient or chant album.
Yeah.
When you were composing this music, were you thinking to yourself, I'm creating a new age album. I'm
No.
creating an ambient album. What are you
I'm actually pretty anti-genre, to be honest.
Yeah,
And in working in films and doing film scores, I do a lot of different kinds of genre. I go all over the place, and I used to be in a rock band and I used to play with Sandra Bernhard and, do all sorts of stuff. And when I was creating this, it really was just, what do I need to get through this experience? What am I feeling?
nice.
And then kind of along the journey, sharing it with my agents and music professionals of mine. They're like, you should really go for a Grammy. And then, the conversation is, what category do you put it in?
Yeah.
And you're like, which is always tough because I mean, I understand the reasoning for it, but I also think that, I just don't like to be restricted to being in a genre. I like to kind of flow around and not think about that.
Well, it's so cool because when I listen to your album, it's amazing, and it's
Oh, thank you.
I would if I were you, I don't know what were the other categories that you would what were
Yeah.
competing for this category? What other categories could you have opted
Some
for?
people were saying it was really hard. Some people were saying a classical compendium because, there were strings and, the instrumentation could go there and there was this concept. Uh, but I don't know. And I think in the end, I think the healing part of this is what kind of put it in that category.
Yeah,
Um,
makes sense.
and yeah,
Yeah, that's
so
cool.
yeah,
So when you say film score, you record music for movies, and how does that work? Does somebody come to you and say, "We're doing a mystery thriller," or
yeah,
it's a rom-com, or and how
yeah.
do you how do you know what to write for the specific scene? Like, what are the logistics of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's really like you were saying, the genre, like everything's all over the place, and the style of the film and the director, it's all over. I would say, like, I get really attracted to stories over like what type of story it is. And usually, a film director will come to me and, either they've heard some of my work or I'll send them some of my work if I really want to work with them, and we see if it's the right match, tonally, artistically, if I have the style that they're envisioning. Um, and then like, it just it's like you take in a story, like almost like my story. It's very similar to like my story through breast cancer. I'll look at a film and say, what's this story? And you know, how do I bring this to life and support it? And it's a lot of, you know, really like letting yourself sink into this film and really, you got to be open, but you're also a little bit, you're stuck in time in film. So you have to like write music that is like to picture. and there are restrictions, but sometimes those restrictions create really cool things, you know?
Cool. I've never
Yeah.
actually really thought about that. So do you do they send you the film without all the sound effects included and let you
Yeah.
actually watch that first, or are you reading the screenplay first
A
and
little bit of both, you know, I the process is different with every film, like, sometimes I'll get the script, which I really love being involved in that process because I'm just kind of envisioning things, and it's so fun to finally see that to picture, but I like to work with the script just to get thematic ideas going, before anything is set in stone.
yeah.
And and then I'll get an actual cut of the film, and the film usually has, like, some temp sound effects or, but at least obviously the dialogue and sometimes they'll even have temp music, you know, if it 'cause a lot of editors like to edit films with music, and so which, you know, composers are like temp music, it's kind of, you know, a good thing and bad thing because you kinda get influenced by it a little bit, you know? So you don't necessarily
Interesting.
wanna do that,
When you
yeah.
say temp music, you mean like temporary sound?
Exactly.
You know it won't be there,
Exactly.
but that could color your
Right.
whole thing, and, like, yeah, almost like if you could start with a silent one, it maybe be easier.
Yeah, it's, like, open and you can really
Interesting,
kind of discover
interesting.
your own sound.
So maybe you
I mean,
watch the film silently?
yes, I do. So that's a lot of it, like, you know, I just even if there's temp, I'll just put the whole film silently with just dialogue and,
Yeah.
you know, really kind of map out what the arc of the story is. And, you know, what I'm basically doing is, you know, when their actors are bringing an element, a huge element of the emotion in. And what I'm doing is just amplifying that in
Mm.
areas, you know, where it needs it, you know, or maybe there's no dialogue and there's something that the director's trying to say. So yeah, I kinda like doing that just to figure out the arc.
That
Yeah.
is so interesting. I love hearing
Yeah.
about this. I like to play music. I'm not nearly as talented as you, but I
Oh,
do
it's
really appreciate it and I love it. And so it's so cool to hear the inner workings of how this goes about. So I'm curious, what type of level did you take your music theory education to? Did you go to school for
yeah.
this, or is this coming
I
all from your 11-year-old, like just
yeah.
yeah.
I mean, you know, I really, like, worked hard and through high school, I had a really great band teacher, but I did go to Berkeley.
Wow.
And, for
It's a
my
big deal.
undergrad
Yeah.
yeah, I went there for my undergrad and I went to grad school because they have a program for specifically for film scoring in Spain. And I love Berkeley. I knew, you know, this was the school for me. You know, just with the contemporary music and I just, you know, I was doing more pop and rock back in the day and it just felt like a great, you know, place, and, you know, they had really great majors like songwriting, which my mom and dad weren't really sure, like,
And they're thinking,
what that
"Oh boy."
degree
Yeah.
but there was a major there that they're pretty big in that I did not take, which I kinda look at now like, "Ah, maybe I'll take some classes there," but for music therapy, and they were one of the few schools that taught that. If not maybe the only school at the time.
Yeah, wow,
Yeah.
that's cool, and this is the idea of basically using music as a therapeutic tool so to
Yeah.
create sound that potentially can help to take someone from a high stress state into a more calm.
Yeah.
And can you explain a little then, 'cause you use the terminology binaural sound when you were
Ye
creating the
yeah,
film. Can you explain that a little bit?
binaural beats is something I experienced going to acupuncture, that was playing in the background, and you know, I had asked, my acupuncturist, "What is this?" I'm, like, so relaxed, like and she was explaining it to me, and I thought, "Oh, this would be great to bring this element in on the album." And basically, usually, you know, you really can hear it with headphones, and you really should experience it with headphones, but, you basically have 2 different tones, and, you know, you'll pick 2 different frequencies, and the difference between those frequencies that magic number, it takes you into a state of mind that is, either relaxed or, more clear. You can see things, hear and see things more clearly. And so it's really the difference between two tones and frequency that
Gotcha.
have scientifically been proven to, help you get into different states of mind. And I just find that fascinating.
That is so
Um,
fascinating. What
yeah,
are you experiment it sounded like you were experimenting with blending different tones and then what, just
yeah.
paying attention to how you felt and then just work off that sense felt of what you're hearing to guide you in the writing process?
Yeah, it really was, and I think one of the big things from this album was, like, being really aware and listening. It's the first track, 'cause if you listen, it's like, it could be just like a simple string, like, but really listen to how it's vibrating, and, so in a way, like, I didn't overwrite for this album, which is always a tough thing for composers because we tend to overwrite. But I just let it sink in, and you was very intentional kinda with the different notes and just, really trying to be simple and just let your mind have the space,
Mm,
while you're listening to it.
that's so cool.
Yeah.
Do you do you have a process of I love jazz, but I don't know a lot about jazz, and so I've started diving in a little more into listening and attempting to see what type of visual imagery comes just from listening and I often wonder if, like, say, the saxophonist or pianist is almost trying to talk through the instrument and tell a story through the notation.
Yeah.
And, do you do that? Do you interact with music in that way where you just try to hear it from a different place versus the analytical mind? It sounds like you do, of course.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the howling kinda like, was just kind of this like free flow, improvisational stuff. A lot of the melodies on the album, they just were first takes of what came out.
Yeah.
And that's something, that I, hadn't really experienced before. It's almost like just improvising and playing a live show and, but as a composer saying, "Okay, that's the composition." It was really cool for me because I don't come from the jazz world. And I love that about jazz. And I love that, when, you know, you can just come out and make the statement with your instrument and that's it. That's the
Mm.
composition.
Ah,
And
yeah.
yeah.
When you were in school, did you have this idea in your head, "I would like to be a film score musician," or were you
Mhm.
going to school thinking, "I wanna be a rock star. I wanna be like a famous musician that tours," and then it turned into, "Well, wait a minute, actually, I need to make money." Or, like,
Yeah.
how how did your musical career develop
You
post
know,
graduation?
yeah, like, everything great. I feel like all these unexpected things happened to me in life, and none of it was really pre-planned, Like, I mean, like, I wanted to be a songwriter, I was like I knew I wanted to write songs, I knew that's what I did. How to make money that way was always like, "Ooh, I don't know, I guess I have to be a rock star. I guess I have to, like, have a fan base and do all that and go on tour." And I did that, and I went on tour and but then, like, things happen, things shift, I lost my mom. That was a really tough thing for me in my life, and, stuff happens that you just throws you off your course, um, and then, that I met Sandra Bernhard. That was a really pivotal moment for me. Someone who I've always, had admired and, just a big fan of, and to be able to rock out with her at South by Southwest, where I met her, was incredible, and, that was a turning point for me of getting into film scores, actually. Now I can see it now looking back because
Mm,
I began touring with her and music directing for her, and that was the first time, like, of, like, experiencing music through someone else's story
mm,
and really just saying, "This is storytelling," whether it's my story, her story, and the music is, supporting that and like or being a part of telling that story. Um and then like I started like just getting into film scores just naturally, like, it just kind of all started happening at the same time,
Wow.
and then I just really fell in love with it. And then when I learned the process of it, I fell in love with it. Um, I think for songwriters and musicians, music on film and TV has been a way to make money, because, album sales don't work how they used to back in the day, so it became a very sustainable, thing for musicians, and I think that's helped keep me here too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's so cool. Do you live in LA?
I do, yeah,
Where did you grow
yeah.
up?
I grew up in Massachusetts, actually, Springfield area, Western Mass, and,
Nice.
yeah.
Was your move to the West Coast when you went to Berkeley?
No, so Berkeley's actually in Boston, and,
Oh
because there
gosh.
is a Berkeley here, but
No, I'm
that's not a
thinking
music school.
that makes
Yeah.
more sense. It's funny 'cause I know someone here who's a musician, and she said that she went to Berkeley, and I was thinking, I knew she was from the Northeast, so but then when you said Berkeley, my mind went to San Francisco.
Yeah.
For some reason, I apologize. Well, thank you for
No,
clarifying that.
that happens, I mean, it's the other Berkeley.
So when was your move to Los Angeles?
It was very gradual, because I moved to Austin, Texas first, and it was to that scene, and that's where I met up with Sandra and all that, and South by Southwest.
Yeah.
And then I moved in 2012, I moved out here. And it was a little tricky to get into the vibes of LA, at first, haven't been in, I was Boston, New York, Austin. I've always been on the move.
Yeah.
Um, but I love it now. I've grown to really love it, and, I love the sunshine, as maybe you can relate to too, like,
The
it's
fun
a
sounds good. I've never heard that before. That's a good one. I like it. Yeah, we need
Yeah.
some sunshine in life for sure, right? Yeah,
Yes, I
everyone
love that.
flocks here to Florida this time of the year because it's
Yeah,
so brutal up north right now with the storms are still coming in apparently. So I
I
hear
know,
you. We get
it's
spoiled. I know.
yeah,
That's cool. My wife and I also had lived in San Diego and I would go to LA a
yeah,
lot. And you're right, the weather is spectacular. It is
it
pretty
really
nice.
is.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I hear you.
yeah,
So with your album now, what type of process happens in relation to do people ask you to perform
yeah.
live? The type of music that you created, is the type of music you created not possible to recreate in a live setting because of the amount of different
Textures and
yeah, textures.
yeah. It actually I performed a couple shows this year. I did a release party, and then I did a show, that was, closer, after I got nominated for a Grammy, I did a show out here at the Hotel Cafe, and, um, it's different, and I love performing. It's a very stripped down version of me on piano and my voice, and, usually I'll have, like, a violinist with me, and, it's like it's very stripped down, and I actually really love it because it's you could hear, like, the fundamental parts of these songs, and it's very, like, kind of where it started, and so I feel like, they've been really fun shows 'cause, you know, they're just and my vocals just get to go all over and really kinda improvise too, so the space, I lean into the space that the album has, and I'm try to grow off that, I've been myself going to sound baths out here, and so a project I'm working on is developing a show that's, kind of in between a live show to venue, but also to get
Ooh,
you into kind of this meditative space. Yeah.
that's a great
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah. I love like trying new things, so I think it'll be fun. Yeah.
So cool. The sound bath thing, when I first got introduced, I just wasn't sure what to expect. And my wife and I have a studio where we're always looking to host people and bring new
Oh,
things
that's
in.
cool.
And I don't want to say I was skeptical, but I just thought, oh, some will be playing bowls and will lay on the floor.
Yeah,
People are gonna like that. But since the first one, I'm surprised at how much people love it and how much I love it.
yeah,
Really nice. I'd love to hear what your creative thoughts are in relation to creating an experience for people in that sort of setting. If you were to create
yeah.
a sound bath like experience, would you ask people to either lie down on the floor or sit on the floor in meditation? Are you thinking a little more like a theater like setting where people are sitting comfortably in like a classic seated chair situation? You're on a stage, or what kind of thoughts have you had in relation to creating that type of experience?
Yeah, I have thought about it kind of, going from both extremes of, between a live show and a sound bath of having people still be at a venue where they are, sitting, but it's still a quiet space, not like a bar or anything like that,
Mm, yeah.
obviously.
Yeah.
But like also, just a place where, you could just close your eyes and you know, you just listen to the vibrations and be in this place where, you're just taking in and letting yourself be by yourself, even though you're in a group of people. Um, and so I kind of just want to have like, acoustic instruments, nothing really amplified, maybe like my voice, but very minimal amplification, I think, just hearing those being in a space that's small enough where the acoustics are, you know, really vibrating and resonating through the room, naturally without, having amplification, I think would be,
Yeah.
yeah,
That sounds
yeah,
cool. Have you,
yeah,
being in LA, you have a lot of yoga studios around you. Have you ever
too.
tried a yoga class?
I have tried so yoga's been something very hard for me, but I'm trying little by little. My partner loves it. So she has together we've been, just doing stuff at home. She'll pull me in at home on videos and stuff like that. And I'm pushing myself to do it because I know the benefits are amazing. And
Yeah.
every single doctor has told me to do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. It'll be good for your stress. Do this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think is holding you back? I'm curious.
It's that I did a class out here actually called Five Rhythms, and I think it's the trauma right now for me very much feels like I need to move, you know?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that's staying still physically is really hard. So when I feel like I just started a boxing class. So just to give you a
Yes.
perspective of where I
Yeah.
am mentally
Yeah.
and emotionally,
Yeah. Understood. That's so cool. I mean, I think that's so smart. You have to do that, right? Just because somebody said
Yeah,
this is good for you, if it's
yeah.
not resonating, you got to
Well,
figure out
that's my
what is
goal.
good
My
for you. Yeah.
my goal is to
Yeah.
get there and get that, and work out these knots in my stomach, and I know it'll be very beneficial for me.
When you reference trauma, are you referencing the experience of going through the cancer diagnosis and treatment, or are you
Yeah.
referencing other elements that occurred in your life?
Yeah, I think that, but I think also, like, grief, has been really hard. I lost my mom when I was 25, and I really struggled with that. She passed in a car accident. It was very sudden.
So sorry,
And
your loss.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it was just so hard, like I think, you know, through the years getting over that and and grief has always been really hard for me to process, and it, of course it happens, we lose people in our lives and just being able to grapple with that. Um, and
Yeah.
there's so many triggers that we have like and so coping is a thing, either we learn the skills to cope is hard, and I think that is something that I look to for music, but also with, you know, potentially yoga, I think, or, working out. It really just, you know, is a
Yeah.
space to kind of work that out. Yeah.
I hear ya. Do you feel like our country is making steps forward to be more supportive and inclusive, and and also in the realm of the LGBTQ family. Do you feel like we're making strides? Do you feel like we're in the same spot we were a long time ago? What are your
No,
thoughts and feelings on
I
that?
think, I think it's a thing where we take a few steps forward, we take a step back, it's back, but I do think we are moving forward. I mean, I last year did a project for Disney about a young girl coming out to her parents. And I'm like, definitely did not have that growing up. So if you look at the big picture, I think
Yeah,
we're doing better. I'm noticing, kids being able to, uh, express themselves and, or, or at least, have that conversation with their parents more, but it's definitely not all there. I think it's, I'd like to think that as we move forward, it is getting better because I know personally I have to hold on to the positivity of what's happening. If I, just drowned in the negative stuff,
yeah,
you got to kind of stay in the positivity, but also say there's still more work to be done, you know?
yep, absolutely.
Yeah,
Were you able to have that conversation with your mom before
I
she
wasn't.
passed?
And,
Yeah,
and, that's one of the things that I've been working out. I do
yeah,
think in the end, I do think we would have worked through it and worked it out. I mean, that's how close we were. I knew, but she grew up Catholic and, and I think it would have been hard at first. And, but I do think we would have worked through it. And, I just watched a film actually about this that blew me away called All of Us Strangers.
I haven't seen that.
Uh, it's actually this conversation. It's exactly that, and I was like in tears throughout the whole movie. It was so moving.
Yeah,
Um, but those conversations that you don't get to have with someone who passed, and as you grow up, and I'm getting older, and I'm coming towards the age of my mom when she passed. And that's like
I
I
hear
don't
you.
know.
I know there's just no way to prepare for losing a parent. It's just not.
Mhm.
Everybody told me about it, and then when it happened to me too, I was like, and then years go by, and you're still going, I'm still processing this. I'm still trying to come
Yeah,
with this. It's incredible, isn't it?
yeah,
I mean,
it really is.
we hear about how parents that outlive their children, how terribly difficult that is for them too, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't ever have to experience, I hope
Yeah,
that's not an issue, but it's amazing when once you have enough people tell you, get ready for this event in your life, you don't really fully comprehend it. Then the event happens, and then you go, "Oh my gosh, I really couldn't hear what they were saying." Then you hear
yeah,
somebody else say to you, "Get ready for this really big event in your life." And now you go, "Uh-oh." Like,
yeah,
I better
yeah,
get ready for this because that last one was so intense. What
yeah,
can I do? But I know there's no way to fully prepare than to just like take care of ourselves and just be as like, you know, honest and truthful,
yeah.
ready for anything and breathe and try to like keep our anxieties at, you know, in a place
It's
where,
really hard.
yeah, I know.
I mean, for me, like, the sudden shock of losing, when someone dies suddenly like that, and then, having gone through cancer where it would have been, this slow, you know,
Yeah.
kinda slow thing,
Yeah.
my mind plays tricks on me going through that. And not always being afraid of, like, when someone calls me at, like, if a family member calls me late at night, it's not bad news all the time,
Yeah.
or,
Good point. Good point. Yeah, that
there's
first
those.
reaction of like, oh gosh, it's gotta be something horrible. Yeah,
Right.
that is that reliving of that funk
Yeah.
you did get. Yeah, good point.
On the flip side, though, just to
Yeah.
note,
Yeah,
because we
please.
were talking about cancer,
Mhm.
um, I live in that, 95% survival chance mentality or whatever that I have because something could crazily happen. That's life, right? There's always the
Yeah.
chance, 5% chance or whatever that,
Yeah.
you know, I could wake up and, something get hit by a car or
Yeah.
something horrible, you just don't know.
Good point.
And so,
I hear ya. Man, well, I like well, first of all, thank you for all your honesty, and I really appreciate
yeah.
just I
Oh,
just feel
thank
so
you.
thankful to have a chance to meet you and You know, I love that we're just meeting and that you feel comfortable to be so honest. So thank you. That means a lot to me. And I really love how this album came to be. Like it just seems like you really put your whole heart into there. And clearly the people that judge the entrance into these sort of competitions thought the same thing too. And
Yeah.
listening to it, it's definitely palpable that something's going on. It's a
Yeah.
broad array of soundscape. And how cool. That's so cool
Yeah.
that you just threw your heart in there because I know any as any storyteller, I think any storyteller, you have to be bold enough to put your story out there. And it's kind of a little intimidating sometimes because of judgment and like
Yeah.
that stuff. How have
Yeah.
you how have you what gave you that drive to be willing to do that? Did you ever have that challenge of feeling comfortable enough to just say, I'm willing to put myself out there?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. It's mentally, like, I think I evolved through this process of the Grammys because, well, when I first, even released the album or thought about releasing it, I didn't want to tell anybody that I had cancer. I just, I didn't even want to talk about it. Like, even talking about it with close friends would trigger me, at that point.
Yeah.
And it just kind of it's just momentum.
Yeah.
The momentum of it, releasing it and people like, music colleagues reaching out and saying, "I heard your album." Like, I actually went, I had a really horrible experience, and this has been really helpful, and they'd be like, If you feel comfortable, I'm curious what you went through." Or they would tell me they went through cancer and then it would like open me up to be able to share. So very much reciprocal of the people listening. Like, that energy, like, is it's circulating.
Yeah.
So it's healing me, like the people listening to
Yeah.
it and talking
Yeah.
to me about it is healing me as well. So
That's amazing, Carla. That's pretty cool.
yeah, just
That's
being
cool.
open,
Yeah.
being open to it is it's something, you can get hurt, but it's I don't know, there's something when you go through something life-changing like this or that's so scary that, you all of a sudden are open. There's this openness that you can,
Yeah.
just put it out there.
Yeah.
Um,
That's great advice for anybody who's listening that's going through a life-threatening illness. When say you meet somebody at a party or an engagement of sorts, and they say to you,
yeah,
"I have breast cancer,"
yeah.
or I'm going through a terminal diagnosis, potential terminal diagnosis. Um, what's your first response? Maybe we have to imagine it, but would your first response be?
To hug them.
Yeah. All right,
And
good
to say and to tell them,
answer.
I was here,
Yeah,
and just, be there for them.
yeah,
During my journey, I can't like I don't remember all the people's names, or I didn't even know people's names, the random people that would help me, like the nurse that I had for 5 minutes who would give me that hug or, make me feel better. Um, there's so many people that I want to thank that that I don't even know, that
yeah.
I knew briefly. Yeah, we're connected in this way,
Nice. Amazing. I really value music. I was born in the 70s, so I went to record stores and flipped through,
Yeah,
loved the entire experience of the artwork, the going into a store, the feeling of looking through albums and having other people walk in and just, people watching while you're looking at albums and everything about it. So I do go into record stores and I purchase
cool.
vinyl because I want to support artists. What can I do to get you to press your album onto vinyl? And if you ever do,
Yeah.
will you send me a signed copy?
I will send you well, the great news is that I will send you a signed copy because I did press it into vinyl.
Hey, you did.
Yeah, so I
Amazing.
will s yeah, I'll be sure to send you that, and,
Oh my gosh, Carla, that's so
yeah,
cool.
I really wanted to do it with this album because, I do think I
Be
love the
great.
sound.
Ooh, that'd be a
Yeah,
perfect vinyl album to
yeah,
have because of the texture, like you said, and all.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, so
Oh
I
my
just I
gosh.
w
So you already did it?
yes,
You already
I
pressed it?
already did it. I pressed a small batch, but I still have copies, so you will get
How
one, and
how many batches did how many did you
I
how
just did like 100 batches, and I actually am gonna do I got a great response from it, so I think I love that because, I don't get to press vinyl all the time, it's one of those things
yeah,
that I was like, "Let me try it out," and I did, like, think, it's not right for every album, because sometimes you get, like, really, like, new recordings today that, are mastered in a way that the album even just, skips off the, can't even play,
you
properly on the
you
record player.
yeah.
Um, so,
Is that because of a
so
lack of skill in the mastering process?
it
Is
was
it not
just mastered for something different,
something
it was
totally different
mastered.
medium? Yeah,
Yeah,
got it. Oh
so
my
I
gosh,
think,
that's so
like,
cool. That gives me an idea.
yeah.
I actually have a record store right next to our yoga studio.
Oh, cool.
I couldn't believe it when I saw the sign saying, "I'm gonna sell records." I thought, "What? Am I in the twilight zone right now?" Because I I had no vinyl at all. I'd given it all away from back in the '90s or whatever, and I thought, "Oh my gosh, a record store? I'm buying a record player," and now all my money's
Yeah.
into that. But, maybe I could even get a couple of copies from you and try to
Yeah.
sell them for you
Yeah, I'd
next
love
door.
that.
That would be
That'd be
awesome.
really cool. I
Alright.
feel, I really want, like, these records to, like, I want people to go, not to say in the right hands, but I want people to listen to it and experience it, and I think, I too love those moments of going through record stores, and this album is very much an album that I think, you listen to from start to finish to really feel the benefit of it,
Yeah.
and I think,
What?
records are that platform, you know?
And I agree. I know. Yeah, it's a whole story that's being told.
Yeah.
Side A, side
Yeah.
B. You gotta go from
Y
start to finish
yeah. Yeah.
versus the, like, "Oh, I listened to 3 minutes of that song, don't like it, hit the next track." It's
Yeah.
like, we don't get
Yeah.
enough time anymore. We gotta, like
No.
you gotta listen to it over and over and over.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
Man,
it's
that's so
like
cool.
it's
Yeah. Well, do you ever come
Yeah.
to Florida? I wanna host you here
Yeah,
for
I
a
have
summer
some
bath.
family, that just
You
moved out
do?
there, so
No
I
way.
am planning I will
Well,
come out.
where out there?
I'm trying to think where she is. I
In
don't
the state of
she just
Florida?
moved there.
You
Yeah, I
Mhm.
feel like maybe close to Fort Lauderdale, maybe,
Oh,
I don't
wow.
know.
Okay.
Uh,
Well, we're really close
w
to Fort Lauderdale, so please,
okay, that
please,
would be
please
really
let me
cool.
know. Please don't hesitate. Don't feel like, "Oh, I'm not I don't wanna bother this person or something." Like, please let me know.
Well, I'd love that, and I feel like I'd love to get to know more about you. We talked all about me, so
Well, this is all about you, so that's the purpose of this. Oh, man. Well, Carla, I've thoroughly enjoyed this. I was so looking forward to it. I was completely honored to have this opportunity. I've never had a chance to speak to an LA musician that's actually doing it for real, and,
Oh,
so
thank
so
you for having
I
me.
really, I thank you, and I can't wait for, to hear feedback. Everyone listening, send us a note, an email. All of Carla's links are in the description. Everyone has listening music devices like Spotify and Tidal and all those different places. So you can listen to it right now. I'll have the link. You just click on it. Definitely go listen.
Oh, cool.
Is there anything else, Carla, before we close that you'd like to add? As I mean, you've given us plenty of inspiration and
Yeah.
motivation here, so you don't have to say anything more. But I'm curious if there's anything else that you would like to
I mean,
add.
embrace the weekend. I mean,
Yeah.
and
Get some sunshine? We got some great
get some
sunshine going here.
sunshine.
What about in LA? What's the weather like there right now? It's April,
It's
what's today's
it's
date? April the
okay,
6th.
we've had our little LA winter, but
Uh,
it's great for me being a New England person, so
yeah, I'll take anything. There's nothing that can scare me off after living in Boston for a while.
right?
Oh my gosh, that's cool. Well, Thank you, Carla. I will have a good weekend. I am looking forward to it. And I will stay in touch. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Please do. Thank you.